We've had a lot of questions about the real estate market lately, and it is a confusing market right now. And the Oregon coast is a very unique market. So what you hear locally or maybe nationally might not apply and probably doesn't apply to the Oregon coast. In this video, I'm going to give you a little bit more clarity about the current market and what to expect over the next year. All that starts now. All right, so we're just now passing the peak of the season, which is usually late July, early August. That's going to be true for most of the country, true on the Oregon coast as well. And the market has been really strange lately. It's definitely been weird over the past 3 years or so since COVID, but it's been especially strange over the past 6 months or so. If you've been following the real estate market in recent times, over the past 10 years or so, at least to the crash back in 07 or 08, it took until about 13, 14, maybe 2015 to catch back up to where home values were right before the crash. And then the market was pretty strong up and through the teens, 18, 19. And then 2020, when COVID hit, a lot of people expected the real estate market to crash. As we all know, the opposite happened. The prevailing thing that caused so much friction in the market was the low inventory. That hasn't changed too much, but it has changed in some ways. And I'm going to get into some of the data and statistics and show you why it's a little bit different now than it's been in previous years. So I admit it's been a very weird market. And if there's one thing you probably are aware of if you've been following the real estate market, it is inventory. And then the other big talking point lately has been interest rate. In fact, the Fed just hiked rates up another quarter point again. So right where we at right now, low sevens, getting closer to mid sevens for a 30-year conventional mortgage. Mortgage applications are about as low as they've been in years. I'm going to show you a chart in a few minutes on that. And then sales are also way down. So if you just take a few of those things, higher interest rates, low mortgage application rates, and sales being way down, you would expect home values to go down as well. And in a lot of cases, they probably would. But again, the inventory is the crux of all this. There still just isn't the inventory for home values to quite go down yet, or at least that's not what we've seen so far. If you watched any of my videos over the past year or so, what I predicted is that we would probably see mostly stagnation, so probably not a lot of growth, maybe 1 or 2% growth, but I never predicted that we would have a crash. There's a lot of people out there that predicted and are still waiting for a crash. That prediction's been coming, I guess really since COVID, since 2020. So for over 3 years now, it hasn't happened yet. In fact, home values right now, at least nationally, are about where they were at their peak last summer, which is probably a big surprise for a lot of people, especially if you would have told those people that rates were going to continue to go up. Because if you remember last fall, when rates got into the sixes, a lot of people thought that we were kind of at the high for rates, and we hoped or thought that they might go down after that. Now, I know that there's a perception that realtors have a bias towards the market not crashing. And I suppose I can understand why realtors are advocates of buying real estate, and they want that real estate to be a good investment. Just between me and you, I don't necessarily consider myself a traditional realtor. I consider myself a broker. I help people achieve their real estate goals through brokering real estate transactions. If anybody that's worked with me, feel free to comment in this video about your experience with working with me. I'm never going to try and sell you a property or try and talk you into a property. I'll give you my opinion. I'll advise you. But I'm never going to try and actually sell you a piece of property. So quite frankly, it really doesn't matter to me if the market goes up or down. All of the people that we've helped in the past buy properties, we certainly want those properties to appreciate, and we want that to be a good investment for them. But just generally speaking, it really doesn't matter to me. In fact, I'm a buyer just like you. There's real estate that I'd like to buy myself, and with prices being the way that they are, as high as they are, I wouldn't mind if they went down myself either. So when I'm one of those people that aren't predicting a market crash, I really don't feel like I'm too biased. And I'm very data driven, and there just hasn't been the indicators that we would expect to see with a real estate crash. We're going to need more inventory. We're going to need a bunch of people to lose jobs. We're going to need indicators that there's going to be a bunch of homes going into foreclosure, or some other reason why inventory is going to go up dramatically. And that just hasn't happened. Interest rates have really stalled the market. And that's one reason why sales are down so much. Somewhere around 50% of the country has around a 3% mortgage. Something like at least 80% of the country is closer to 4 or lower. And so a lot of people don't want to trade that 3 or 4% that they have for 7%, or even maybe we might even get into the 8s at this point. It's hard to say. So the market has really stalled. A lot of people aren't selling because they don't want to buy with a higher interest rate. Now, the Oregon coast is going to be a little bit different. One thing, and if you're somebody that follows the real estate market, you probably go to places like Zillow, Realtor.com, Redfin, Trulia, wherever you get your information, wherever you search for homes online. I look at those websites myself as well. And one thing that's actually really kind of surprised me, we'll go over to this first before we get into some of the regional multiple listing services data. I'm going to show you some emails that I get from like a Zillow, for example, because I've actually been kind of surprised to see some of this over the past just the past couple of months or so. Get these emails that Zillow sends you. I'm sure Redfin, Realtor.com, you probably get them from somewhere like that too. They give you their market updates, and included in those market updates is their forecast. Now, over the past year or so, and again, if you go back to any of my videos about a year ago where I said I expected maybe 1% or 2% growth, around that time, I was getting these emails from Zillow telling me that we're expecting maybe negative 1, 2, 3, 4% growth, expecting the market to go down over the past year. These emails that I'm getting now, I'm seeing a lot of these forecasts 4, 5, 6% up over the next year. And quite frankly, it's a little bit counterintuitive with rates going up as high as they are. But again, like I mentioned, the Oregon coast is a little bit different. And the reason why it's a little bit different is because there's a lot more cash on the Oregon coast. Retirees coming from Oregon that want to retire on the Oregon coast, a lot of people moving from out of state. People coming from California, Texas, Nevada, Arizona, probably some of the more common states that we get people reaching out to us from. And whether those be retirees or people with California, they have a lot of equity in their homes. Home values are extremely high there. So oftentimes people from California have enough cash to be able to buy what they want without financing on the Oregon coast. So there's a lot more cash buyers out there that aren't affected by rates. So I'm just going to show you, this is Astoria. So forecast 6.6 for the next year. This is Warrenton, just north of Gearhart Seaside. Same for Warrenton. About the same thing for Seaside, down into Cannon Beach. Again, 6.6, 7.4. This is just south of Cannon Beach in Arch Cape, a little tiny community. So these numbers, seeing these numbers over the past month or so from Zillow has been quite surprising to me. I wouldn't have guessed that they would have predicted that the market would go up that much over the next year or so. And if you're wondering, how does Zillow, where do these numbers come from? A lot of people like to look at the Redfin estimate for their home or the Zestimate for their home. And a lot of people will kind of base their home value off of that. And quite frankly, those numbers oftentimes are fairly accurate. How they get those numbers is they take the comparable sales to your home in your area, the most comparable homes, the homes that have this most similar size lot, home size, bedroom size, year built, the important data inputs like that, and they just average those numbers out, and that average usually tends to be fairly accurate. Now, Zillow is not going to be privy to things like, if you just did a kitchen remodel, or say your home's 30 or 40 years old and you've never done an update. If you've got a 40-year-old home and you've never updated anything in that home, statistically speaking, chances are your neighbors, the people that have sold their homes recently that Zillow is using for comps, those people have done some sort of updates. And so if your home isn't updated and it's older, your estimate is probably higher than it's actually worth. If you've done a bunch of recent updates that Zillow doesn't know about, your home's probably worth more than your estimate. So these numbers are actually typically fairly accurate because it's all just based on data. But again, seeing this forecast, I'm not really sure why they are predicting that home values will go up so much along the Oregon coast, even though, despite, like I mentioned, a lot of cash transactions happening. That's not necessarily something that Zillow is. They don't explicitly share their algorithm, of course, but presumably they're not privy always to that data, and they're not always. Even if they were, that's not going to necessarily factor into their algorithm. So this is just based on comps. These predictions are based on recent sales. And if you're following this from wherever you're watching, I'm guessing you're probably not seeing numbers like this. So this is Lincoln City, just south of Lincoln City, getting to Salishan and Glidden, Eden Beach, one of the more populous parts of the Oregon coast. Again, still staying in the sixes. Just south of this is north of Newport, little tiny community, but a 7.3% increase. Now, if we compare some of these numbers to the largest, most populous part of Oregon, the Portland metropolitan area. Now, granted, that's a tri-county area. Multnomah County is where Portland proper is. Portland's had a lot of problems since COVID, since 2020. But with that being said, Zillow is still predicting like 1% and 2% increases for some places in Portland. But the other two counties in the tri-county area, Washington, Clackamas County, which is where a lot of people from Multnomah County are moving to, even those areas are not seeing forecasts like this, 6% appreciation over the next year. There is Newport. This is South Beach, just south of Newport. Moving on down into Seal Rock towards Walport. More of the same. A lot of the Oregon coast predicted to be in the 6% appreciation range. A little bit lower over here, 5% for Florence. And as we move south towards North Bend, Coos Bay. As you can see, one thing that might jump out to you, homes here are about as inexpensive as anywhere that you'll find on the Oregon coast, and this is the most populous area of the Oregon coast. The two combined areas make up there's about 25,000 people in the North Bend, Coos Bay area, so you're going to find a lot more homes for sale over there. The inventory is not going to be quite as constrained. And then finally, Gold Beach and Brookings. I'm going to show you the RMLS data for all of these areas here in just a moment. One thing you're going to be surprised about, or maybe not if you watch some of my recent videos, is that inventory is actually pretty high in Brookings, although it might not feel that high in some places, and I'll explain why in just a moment. Here's a chart for mortgage applications to buy a house. As you can see, about as low as it's been in a long time. So not a lot of people excited about those 7% rates when a lot of people that plan to buy homes that have been doing so. It's a long process, especially with the internet. People tend to start their process with gathering information on the internet a lot earlier than they used to traditionally before we had the internet. So it's a much more longer, there's a much longer, wider window for that whole process. So people sometimes will start years out, and a lot of people were forecasting with 3 or 4% rates a couple years ago. So it's taken some adjustment for people to stomach these new 7% rates and what that means for their monthly mortgage payment. Now, this is national data. We'll get into the local data here in just a moment, but this is inventory from the past 3 years, including this year. You can see the black line, 2023. Now, inventory not necessarily lower than it was in 2021 rather. A little bit lower than it was last year. But so inventory not necessarily being as low as it's been lately, it still might feel lower in some ways because the market is a lot different than it was in the last couple of years, in that everything that was on the market in the last couple of years, 2021 and 2022, everything was selling very quickly. Whereas the past 6 months, the past year or so is kind of more of a story of the haves and the have-nots, if you will, in that either a home is going to be very desirable and priced right and will go under contract, go pending very quickly, 2, 3, 4, 5 days, something like that, almost immediately. If you use those websites like Zillow, Realtor.com, Redfin, and if you heart or like or whatever action it is that website has to follow that home, you probably get an email once the home goes pending. So a lot of people that do that, they'll see a home that's new to the market, they'll love that home, and then a couple days later they get an email that home went pending. And so it feels like in some ways that homes are still selling very quickly, but you'll also you're going to see homes that have been on the market for a very long period of time. 3, 4, 5, 6 months, where that wasn't the case in the most recent years. So even though inventory isn't at its lowest, we don't have a lot of new inventory. So in some ways, it might feel lower than it's felt. One thing to look at to notice with this graph is the mustard colored line and the lighter red colored line here. You'll notice as we come into August, inventory was still climbing. It was climbing higher than it is now. Inventory is really kind of leveled out. And again, that's due to rates and the market sort of being stalled and people not wanting to trade those rates. So looking at this graph, we're not going to predict, unless something major changes, that inventory is not going to change a whole lot over the next 6 months or so. Here's new listings. New listings for the past 3 years. 2021, 81,000 new listings. 2022, 74. 2023, 62,000 new listings. So not a lot of new homes coming to the market. And when the new homes do come to the market, like I said, a lot of those homes are going pending very quickly. So even though the inventory isn't the lowest that we've seen, again, that's a reason why it might feel like there's just not as many choices out there, despite inventory not being actually as low, not being at its low for the past 3 years or so. Here's new listings for the past 10 years. So 2020, COVID really stands out right there, where we had lockdowns, right? So that's the reason for the big gap right there is the lockdowns. But as you can see, new listings right now, about as low as they have been in 10 years. Yes, the market is stalled out. And the last graph I have for you here, these are homes under contract. So homes that have accepted an offer and have gone pending. Dark red line being from the most recent year, 2023, the lighter line, 2022. So we have 375,000 single-family homes in contract now from the beginning of the year, as opposed to 417,000 homes. So fewer listings, even though there's more inventory. This shows us that people aren't as interested in all of the inventory that's on the market. Again, that's why you're starting to see some homes that are on the market for 4, 5, 6 months. And I will say this too, because we commonly get the question, if something's been on the market for a couple of weeks, sometimes, especially a couple of months, the most common question is, what's wrong with that property? Well, most of the time, it just means the property is priced incorrectly. It's priced too high. There's a lot of people that really want to take advantage of the red hot market in 2022, 2021. And some people went with a pricing strategy of pricing their home very, very high. It worked out for a few people, but a lot of people, once they got past midsummer of last year, 2022, especially when rates started to go up, people did not adjust quick enough. And unfortunately, and I actually saw, I'm not going to say any names, but I saw some fellow brokers make the same mistake and price their homes too high, or at least higher, too high to sell. Maybe it wasn't their ultimate goal to sell. Maybe it was more like, hey, if somebody will give me this, I'll take it, but I don't necessarily need to sell. But I did see a lot of people, including brokers, price their homes too high and then not adjust quick enough to the market. And so those are some of the homes that have sat on the market for 3, 4, 5, 6 months and have sort of given us this higher inventory, even though we don't have as many new listings. So let's take a look at some local data here real quick. We're going to start with the North Coast, Northern Oregon coast. The RMLS breaks this down into 3 counties. So the northwesternmost county is going to be Clatsop County. That's where, actually, I'll take you to a map here. Just below that is going to be Tillamook County, followed by Lincoln County. So take you to a map so you can see all of the towns. I'm not going to list off all the towns, but you can see some of these on the map. I'll list off some of the bigger ones for some of those that are just listening. Clatsop County is going to be Astoria, Warrenton, Gearhart, Seaside, Cannon Beach, down into Arch Cape. Tillamook, Manzanita, one of the more popular towns along the Oregon coast. Next name, probably most popular name, you're going to recognize Rockaway Beach. You might hear about Garibaldi. Tillamook, of course, not exactly a coastal town, but close enough to the coast to be considered. Oceanside, Neatarts, Pacific City, Great Town, down into Nesquin. And then Lincoln County, so it's going to be Lincoln City, Lincoln Beach, Depot Bay, If you recall, actually, we saw numbers for Salishan, Glen Eden Beach that I showed you from Zillow, those predictions. That's right there, if you're wondering where that is. Depot Bay, Newport, down into Walport, and then finally Yachats. Now, beyond that, well, we'll start right there, and we'll get into Lane County, beyond that, where Florence is going to be. So here's inventory in months. If you're not familiar with what this data point means, this means if no new homes came to the market and nothing else changed effectively, this is how many months it would take to get rid of all of the inventory on the market. Now, in a balanced market, it's going to be closer to 4 to 6 months. So as you can see in 2021, never got past 2 months. The closest was 1.9 in January. The market does slow down in the winter. So like I mentioned at the beginning of this video, we are at our peak. Peak meaning this is about when we would expect home values and prices to be at the highest. They tend to go down a little bit through the winter. And then once springtime comes, which is when a lot of people tend to move, especially places where people are moving for schools. People want to be moved and settled in before school starts, which is oftentimes around the beginning of September. So, and of course, in Oregon, we have the weather too. It's no fun to move or to try and sell your house during the rainy season. So prices tend to go down a little bit through wintertime, and then we'll peak back up into springtime when a lot of the new inventory comes to the market and a lot of new buyers, and that's when it gets really competitive. That's when a lot of people are coming out to buy. So you're going to see more offers, you're going to see more competition, and so home prices go up a little bit more in springtime. So same thing every year. So 2021, 2022, that was the first time we started to get into 2 months of inventory around that springtime. That's where you see that little spring bump right there. So for 2023, actually look back right here to fall of 2022. This is when rates first hit into the sixes. And so that's when the market really started to slow. Inventory built up through the winter of 2022 into 2023. Came down a little bit, and rates actually came down a little bit as well. And then you get that spring bump right there in April, 4.5 months of inventory. So that's as much inventory as we've seen on the northern Oregon coast with spring of 2023. But now we can see going back down and down farther and faster than you would expect. And that's again because the market is stalled mostly due to interest rates. So sales trends, like I mentioned, sales are way down year over year, month over month. This is this data. RMLS always you get this data. It lags about a month. Some of this data that I showed you down here, this is national data. This company that tracks this data, Altos Research, they're going to be week to week. So that's one reason why I used a lot of that data. But RMLS is always going to be lagging a little bit. So that's why this is the most recent data that we have right here. So that's why you see June is the most recent data, even though this is early August. So real estate trends, closed sales are going to be up. They're always going to be up at this time of the year from May to June. But year over year, sales are down 18% on the northern Oregon coast. All right, let's go to, now this is Lane County. This data is not going to be the best for the Oregon coast, being this is where Florence is, being because most of the data is going to come here from Eugene. There's a couple 100,000 people in Eugene as opposed to about 10,000 people in Florence. We'll still take a look at it anyways. Same thing is going to be true of the next one that we'll look at, which is Reedsport. Most of the population coming here from Roseburg and some of these surrounding towns is going to be about 50,000 people. Reedsport, just a couple thousand people, maybe 3,000 people. Probably one of the lesser known areas along the Oregon coast. Don't get too many questions about that. Not that it's not a great area, but definitely not one of the more popular areas, if you will. So Lane County, I've seen a lot of the same, low inventory. Look back to 2021, they barely had a month of inventory throughout a lot of that time, 2022, and they started to crack towards midsummer through fall time. They started to get into a couple or at least a month or so of inventory, and then into the winter, a couple months of inventory. But where are we at right now? Very low inventory, 1.6 months of inventory as of June. Again, closed sales are going to be up month over month when we're comparing, the peak season right now. But year over year, closed sales down 21.5%. Douglas County, again, this is where that Reedsport was, very similar. Inventory 2.7 months for June. Closed sales just slightly up month over month, but year over year down 11%. Next county we're going to look at here is Coos County. So like I mentioned, this is going to be the most populous place along the Oregon coast. The Coos Bay North Bend area, again, about 25,000 people in this area, just right in here, give or take or so. Also, again, one of the more inexpensive places along the Oregon coast, if that's what you're looking for. Same thing for them in 2021, never cracked 2 months of inventory. It wasn't until midsummer of 2022 that they did. And like a lot of the other markets, built up through the winter of last year, and then they didn't really quite get as much of a spring bump, but inventory is at 3.2, which is as high as it's been, kind of going back into February. Closed sales, month over month, up 16%, but down 22%. So that's going to be the recurring theme. And finally, like I mentioned, Brookings, Curry County. Look at this inventory. So they had also low inventory through 2021 as well, although there were a few months where they cracked 2 months worth of inventory. And same thing, saw that uptick through midsummer and then through the winter time, got all the way up to February of 2023, 8.4 months of inventory. Now, with that much inventory, you would think that it would actually skew more towards a buyer's market, but there really isn't anywhere that we've really kind of seen that is actually still going to be a buyer's market. It's still always been at least a slight edge towards the sellers. And that's been true down here as well. But you can see, just like the rest of the markets, inventory is going down, and now went from 8.4 into the 6s, the 7s in May, and then 5.6 months of inventory in June. So we'll expect this inventory to probably continue to go down for all of the markets for the reasons that I mentioned. Closed sales month over month, really great, 34%, but closed sales year over year, 27%. So if you're a buyer, if you're thinking about buying along the Oregon coast, what does this mean for you? Like I said, it still for the most part skews a little bit towards a seller's market because of that inventory. Wintertime is a good time to buy, but you're just probably not going to have a whole lot of choices. So if you can identify a property that you want that'll work for you, wintertime could be a good time to buy, but the pickings will be very, very slim. Now, the one thing I would say, the one consolation for buyers is that, there are sellers that maybe are, I don't know if I want to say panicking, but there are sellers do have this sense that it might be hard for them to sell their home or get what they want for their home at this point. It took a while for sellers that were thinking about selling or that put their home on the market over the past year to kind of adjust and realize that some of the prices that we saw in 2022, you weren't going to get that in the fall or the winter of 2023. Like I mentioned, it wasn't really until now that we've kind of gotten back in a lot of places to where prices were. But with interest rates going up and the Fed announcing that they're going to have at least one more rate hike, even after the one that just came over the past week, there's a lot of sellers that are maybe a little bit worried about getting what they want for their home or their home selling in along the timeline that they'd like it to sell for. So for you as a buyer, you do have that working for you. The best thing that you can do is when we identify a property for you, and that's part of what we're here for. When you identify a property, being decisive, being quick, the worst thing that you want to do is have a property sit for 3, 4, 5, 6 days, have a bunch of showings, come through there with a new listing and allow the listing agent to talk to a lot of different people and drum up a lot of different offers. What do I mean by drum up? Well, what happens is when you have a new property come to the market, the listing agent is going to be communicating with all the buyer's agents, somebody like myself. And, they're going to ask about, did the people like the house? Are they thinking about writing an offer? And as, buyer's agents, we usually want to establish a cordial relationship with that listing agent. We want to give them as little information as we can while getting as much information from them as we can. But if if our buyer client really wants to get that property, we definitely don't want a property to get, bought out from underneath us. So we do want to at least let them know to some degree that there's a level of interest there. And a seller's agent is going to use that as much as they can to take that and to try and leverage that to get other buyers agents to write them offers. Hey, so-and-so just saw the house. They're very interested, so on and so forth. They're probably going to write an offer. They like to exaggerate these things a lot, of course, but they're going to try and drum up offers. And so you don't want to give them a lot of time to do that. So the best thing you can do is be decisive and be quick to the draw on a property. And the other thing really is it's just case by case. All of these markets, kind of as you saw, are a little bit different. The Oregon coast is very unique. It's really going to just depend on the property. Does it have water views? How desirable is it? Is it move-in ready? Does it have any problems? There's so many different things that's going to make each transaction unique. And so that's where we come in. We've helped a lot of people buy homes and move to the Oregon coast. If you're one of those people that's thinking about moving to the Oregon coast, I invite you to call us. You can text us, you can email us. All of the contact information that you see on the screen here is below in the description of this YouTube video. There's also a link if you want to hop into our calendar and schedule a Zoom call with us, usually best for people that are coming from outside of the state, which I know so many of you watching are. So grab a Zoom call with us, meet us that way, get to know you a little bit better, and then we can really start to dive into strategy. So I don't want you buyers out there to think that it's going to be super tough. Again, it's such a weird market right now with interest rates being the way that they are and the market sort of being stalled. It feels like it should be a buyer's market, but with some of the data, with inventory still being low, new listings being low, Zillow's making these predictions that home values are going to continue to go up. It doesn't necessarily, it doesn't really feel like a buyer's market in a lot of ways. So that's where we come in. That's where our strategy and expertise can come in. We'd love to speak to you if you're somebody that's thinking about moving to the Oregon coast. And if this video helped you, give us a thumbs up, lets us know we're doing a good job. Feel free to leave a comment. And if you want to see more videos like this, or videos we more commonly do are videos about pros and cons, driving footage, drone footage, neighborhood tours, videos that are about what it's like to live on the Oregon coast, make sure and subscribe to this channel. Until next time, take care, everyone.